Chapter 5. Morgan and Eli got home in record time, thanks in part to Eli, who was walking faster than Morgan had ever seen. They didn't talk much. He couldn't wait to use the drawing pad, she could tell. As he walked, he checked every few seconds to make sure it was still snugly under his arm. He hadn't even asked Morgan where her secret hiding place was. And for a kid not to ask about a secret hiding place, well, his mind had to be somewhere else. It really wasn't a secret hiding place, it was more a forbidden place, and even that made it sound more exotic than it really was. The attic was on the 3rd floor of the house. There was a flight of stairs that went halfway from the 2nd floor to a landing, followed by another flight of stairs that took you the rest of the way. "Here's the thing," Morgan said when they got home. "My secret hiding place is the attic, and it's really just that we're not allowed up there. Has James had that talk with you, the do's and don'ts?" Eli shook his head. "Not yet. He probably doesn't want to scare you off," she said. "In short, the attic is getting renovated into a family room or something because there's a hazard everywhere you step. You're not allowed up there." "What kind of hazards?" he asked. "Well, never mind that." She brushed it off. "It's kind of like a curfew, you know. To be safe, you're supposed to come home before 8 o'clock. But what's really going to happen if you come home at 9? There aren't hazards, really." There actually were. But Morgan was of the opinion that once Eli was up there, he'd see that the benefits outweighed the risks. So what if the nails on the ground were there, exposed wires? They were dead wires, so whatever. "So it's just an attic?" Eli stated. James was a doctor, Katie a teacher, and neither of them got home until around 5 o'clock, often later, so Morgan knew she had plenty of time to show Eli what she meant. She started to lead him up the stairs. "Eli, you drew all those pictures with super pretty locations and walking animals, and it's all so magical and amazing, and yet—" She stopped for a moment with one more flight of stairs to go. "And yet, you think an attic is just an attic?" Eli shrugged. They kept going, and soon they were in the attic, looking out over its grandeur. "So it's just an attic," she said, repeating Eli's words and shaking her head. She gave him a nudge. "Come on." Morgan suspected that the large open room used to be 2 bedrooms. She'd arrived at the house with the attic mid-construction, and 2 months later, it was still mid-construction. As far as she could remember, the construction guys had only been there twice. If they hadn't left their tool bags and some other equipment behind, you would never have guessed they were doing any work at all, or that they even existed. It was a skeleton of a room. There was plywood flooring throughout, mostly deconstructed walls with the electrical wires that had been cut off from their power source exposed, scattered piles of debris waiting to be taken away, sections of drywall, cut up pieces of plywood, light fixtures, nails, screws, wire, and broken glass. The only slightly curious thing about the attic, other than to imagine what the room might look like in a billion years when it was finally finished, was a painted-over door on the wall beside the stairs that at one point might have been a closet when the attic had bedrooms. There was definitely space behind the door for there to be something. It didn't open to the outside of the house or anything like that, but really, Morgan had no idea what that something could be. There were layers upon layers of paint. You couldn't even see where the door ended and the door frame began, and it didn't seem like the renovation plans included any work on the door or whatever lay behind it. "So where do you read and write and stuff?" Eli asked. "Ah," Morgan raised her index finger. "I was hoping you'd ask that. Follow me, little one." "Hey." Eli's face scrunched up like he'd stuck a lemon in his mouth. "Sorry, you're not little. I was just being dramatic." "I am little, but you're making me feel weird about it." Morgan led Eli to the window and looked out over the street. The window, also to this point, had been left mostly untouched. Only its frame had been stripped away. On the floor in front of the window, there was a Morgan-shaped space, clear of any debris. "There's no electricity, so I use a flashlight on my cell, or the streetlight when my cell dies," Morgan explained. There was a book leaning against the wall under the window. Morgan picked it up, then lay down on her stomach exactly where she had lain down each night since she'd come up here, safe from any hazard. She opened her book to the page she'd dog-eared and started reading. Every few lines she looked to the side to check on Eli, who just stood there at first, looking out the window. But then he started to kick away debris to make a space for himself, and eventually he sat down beside Morgan. He flipped the drawing pad to its first page, opened his pencil case, and took out a pencil. Morgan smiled. She liked that this was no longer a place just for her. It was for the both of them. She didn't remember much about the first foster home she'd been taken to, only that she'd felt very alone. Everything was so big, and she was so small. This was Eli's first foster home, and though he was much older than she had been, she could tell that he kind of felt the same thing, alone. Now maybe he wouldn't feel that way. Not so much, at least. After that, Morgan gave most of her attention to her book, and she could tell that Eli was giving his attention to the empty page in front of him, full of possibilities. For a good while, the only sound was the flip of a page. Morgan figured that Eli was taking his time, thinking of the perfect thing to draw for his first work of art in the new book. She bet that he felt the same excitement she felt on the first page of a novel, the prospect of a new world. Finally, out of the corner of her eye, she saw his pencil hit the blank white page, as white as the blizzard she'd pictured first thing that morning. As soon as it did, loose strands of hair swayed in front of her face. She blew them off to the side and kept reading. Moments later, her hair was in her face again. This time she felt a subtle breath, cool against her skin. "Would you stop that?" she asked. "Stop what?" "Blowing on me, obviously." "I'm not blowing on you," he said. "I'm sketching something." Morgan peeked over at Eli's drawing and immediately forgot everything. It looked like he was creating some kind of a figure. Not a human, but something that walked on two legs. "What are you drawing?" she asked. Eli stared as though he hadn't just drawn it. "I don't know," he said. I'm kind of just making it up, I guess." "Cool." She nodded her head, impressed. Even just the start of it was awesome. The few pencil strokes he'd made to create this humanoid animal, it looked just as good as anything in the other drawing pad, the one involved in the hit and run. One last look, and she went back to reading. She got a lot more reading done when she was up there alone, she realized. But I for sure am earning some good karma, she thought. She hadn't gotten more than a line into reading when cool air rushed against her cheek, this time stronger than before. "Okay." Morgan slapped her book shut and slammed it against the floor. A cloud of dust erupted from the plywood and danced in the light. "I was cool with it, now I'm not." Eli dropped his pencil, as if it were burning his skin. "I'm this close." Morgan pinched her index finger perilously close to her thumb, "to revoking your secret room privileges, Eli, I swear." "I felt that," he whispered. "Well, yeah." Morgan pushed herself up into a sitting position and threw her arms in the air. "No kidding. You're blowing on me and it's kind of creepy." "I'm not blowing on you," Eli said. His voice was trance-like. "You're not blowing on me," Morgan stated. "Then what's blowing on me? It came from your direction and the attic is not haunted." "My paper did it." Morgan stared at Eli and the room was dead quiet until she burst into laughter. Eli, however, was not laughing at all. "Eli, your paper did it?" She could barely get the words out. "I'm not lying." The more Eli sat there staring at Morgan's stone face, the less she felt like laughing. She caught her breath. "Well, there's probably a draft or something," she said. It like went across your paper and hit me in the face. I swear, though, if you're doing it, don't." "It came from my paper," he said deliberately. Something about the way he said it made her reconsider his claim, even though it was just about the most ridiculous thing she'd ever heard. More ridiculous than her daydream about Emily stealing Eli's drawing pad. "Okay," she said, "do it again." Eli hesitated. He reached for the pencil a few times before finally picking it up. He let the tip of it hover over the paper, ready to draw. The pencil was a millimeter from the white surface when Morgan heard the successive beeps that always rang out when the front door opened. "Kids," Katie called all the way from the first floor, "come down for dinner, I got takeout." Eli pulled the pencil away from his drawing and slipped it back in its case. "To be continued," Morgan said.